Well, before we get started and dive into this week's interview, I want to remind you that the submission deadline for issue 3 of the audio magazine has been extended to December 31st. Getting a nice little pile of submissions now, which is nice to see. Theme is heroes. You can go over to brendanomero.com for guidelines. Essay should be no more than 2,000 words. It's a written submission. If accepted, of course, then we record. So as you're rereading and rewriting your piece, bear in mind it's an audio essay. So pay attention to the way the words are rolling out of your mouth. Out of your face mouth. From Crazy Ira and the Douche. Those who know, they know. Email your submissions with heroes in the subject line to creativenonfictionpodcast@gmail.com. Oh yeah, I pay writers some of that burrito money also. Got it? Okay, good.
A bad idea drawn really beautifully is still a bad idea.
Well, hello there. It's a Creative Nonfiction Podcast, a show where I speak to badass people about the art and craft of telling true stories. I'm Brendan O'Mara. How's it going? And sometimes that form of telling true stories takes a graphic approach, a visual approach. So enter Jesse Springer. He is on the show, and he has a new book, Only in Oregon, which is a greatest hits collection of 26 years of his Oregon-themed political cartoons. He's a regular cartoonist to the Register Guard in Eugene. I edit, as part of my day job, I edit the opinion page. Some of you may have heard that. And as a result, I get his political cartoon every week, and I get to run it. And it's one of those things that lands in my inbox every Thursday as I'm getting the weekend page together, and it's always a nice little treasure to see that before just about anyone else does. He's a graphic designer and cartoonist based out of Eugene. He actually came to the studio in person with his own microphone and boom arm, and we did an in-person thing. It was pretty wild. Very few of those, and count them on like my hand. I think it's like Elena Passarello, Jesse Springer, Emily Poole. I think that's it. You can check out his new book by visiting springerdesign.biz/books. springerdesign.biz, B-I-Z/books, plural. What I loved about the book is that it tells the Oregon story over the past quarter century. You know, frame by frame. Yeah, there are some very Oregon-specific things, like this kicker refund tax thingamahoosit that I don't totally understand, or this thing called PERS, P-E-R-S, which is some sort of pension plan that I think a lot of public employees pay into, which is a source of contention. Also, don't understand that. But there's wildfires and stuff that I understand. Then there's the timber wars, which I sort of understand, but it's very complicated. Well, you can see that Oregon is very diverse in its subject matter and very complex. It is a shade of gray. And that's very fitting in the rainy season, that it's always overcast and raining for a good chunk of the year. Rain is my sunshine. That's why I love it. Anyway, the book itself, it probably won't have that much appeal outside of Oregon, obviously, but Jesse and I do talk about how he goes about the work. So some of that stuff that you've come to expect from the show, I think you can draw inspiration from, whether you doodle or not. I got my COVID booster, so I feel like hell. And so I'm going to keep the intro very short, and there will be no parting shot. I know. I'm sure you're bummed. I'm sure you're crying into your can of beer right now, and I don't have one right now. I don't have a can of beer. And that's my fault. That's on me. Head over to brendanomero.com, and you'll find show notes, and you can sign up for the Up to 11 monthly newsletter, recommendations, raffles, exclusive happy hour, first of the month, no spam. Cannot beat it, so far as I can tell. You can always keep the conversation going on Twitter, at CNFPod, Instagram, at Creative Nonfiction Podcast. Jesse is at Springer Tunes on Twitter. So before we get to that, let's do this. Let's do this. Support for the Creative Nonfiction Podcast is brought to you by West Virginia Wesleyan College's low residency MFA in creative writing. Don't hit skip. Or maybe you will. Don't do it. Don't. Now, in its 10th year, this affordable program boasts a low student-to-faculty ratio and a strong sense of community. Don't hit skip. Recent CNF faculty include Randon Billings, Noble, Jeremy Jones, and CNF pod alum Sarah Einstein. I said don't skip. There's also fiction and poetry tracks. Recent faculty there being Ashley Bryant Phillips and Jacinda Townsend, as well as Diane Gilliam and Savannah Sipple. Don't skip. No matter your discipline, if you're looking to up your craft or learn a new one, consider West Virginia Wesleyan, right in the heart of Appalachia. If you skip, you're going to miss the URL. It's mfa.wvwc.edu. It's a bunch of letters. It's pretty wild. Blew my mind when that came to the front of my brain. More information, dates of enrollment, go there. Do it. Okay, Jesse Springer is here, and I think you'll love how he goes about vetting his ideas for cartoons and how the writing is like 80 to 90%, probably more like 90%, the most important part of the entire process. So here's my conversation with Jesse Springer. Early on, you figured out that you were like, if I'm going to make a go at this, I have to be really specific, in Oregon in particular.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, in the very beginning, it was just Eugene, Oregon. That was my very specific niche. Actually, the goal was to sort of widen that scope all the way to sort of become like a nationally syndicated cartoonist. That was my big dream, right? But then, of course, the internet happened, and newspapers started shedding editorial cartoonists rather than hiring them. So I figured out my economic model is to stick with that niche exactly of Oregon.
Yeah, and it's when I was reading the introduction to Only in Oregon, and you specifically talk about that as a business decision to stay very, very local, as it were. Mm-hmm. It's like when you and I were coming up roughly around the same time in journalism and this kind of thing, there was a well-worn path that got completely disrupted by the internet, and then all of a sudden everyone is trying to find new footing. So what was the challenge for you early on to blaze a new trail, because those well-worn paths that we were kind of following up and told to follow were quickly just shattering below our feet?
Well, I mean, so I had, as I mentioned, I had sort of started in Eugene, and then I had self-syndicated to Oregon papers. That is, I just got in touch with the editors of the papers myself and distributed them myself. And so I was already in that position when I was wanting to then jump to the national level and try to get the attention of national syndicates. So when I realized that was no longer kind of a practical reality that was within my reach, I was already in the position that I needed to be in to just stick with that Oregon niche. And so, maybe the hard part was the decision to say, to just really figure out this is going to be the focus of the work that I'm going to do, not just in terms of who I'm distributing to, but this is what they want and what they need. Like the Oregon papers, they want quote unquote local content because that's really where their bread and butter is. I can go on Yahoo News and get the national stories, but the news aggregators won't give you what's necessarily going on in more locally. So it was just amazing. It used to be that in the local daily paper, in the Register Guard, it would be, like national, international news on the front page. That was sort of seemed normal. And now it's everything that's local is really the front page news, because that's where their market is. That's who they're selling to. That's what their readership is looking for.
Yeah. And so as you're looking to cut your teeth as a cartoonist, what were some of those early steps of wanting to marry your influences with the news of the day? Who was inspiring you?
artwork wise, I really was inspired by Jim Borgman from the Cincinnati Enquirer, and he still draws Zitz, which is a cartoon that a lot of people see. And then I would say, just though, in terms of really just amazing ideas, is a guy named Tom Tolles, who started out with the Buffalo paper and then was hired by the Washington Post after winning probably the Pulitzer maybe a couple of times or something. And what's great about him is that, I don't know if you remember the comedian Stephen Wright, but he was a guy that had this really deadpan delivery of his jokes, and that was kind of his style. And that's how I see Tom Tolles as a cartoonist, because his art is, because I've seen artwork that he's done, which is like really exquisite, but his political cartoons, his artwork was very rudimentary, I guess, in a way. And so to me, it was kind of on purpose that it was this deadpan delivery of his genius ideas and the way he did it. I just thought that was really genius. I thought that was really amazing. Yeah, so he's one of my heroes.
And at what point do you figure out that it's or how do you navigate the balance between the writing of the cartoon and the drawing of the cartoon, and and what might you identify as the most important?
Yeah, that's a great question, because a lot of people tend to focus on the artwork, and as I was just alluding to, it's really the writing of the cartoon that I want to give 85 or 90% importance to, because if you think about it, a bad idea drawn really beautifully is still a bad idea. Yeah. and so you got to have a great idea, and the drawing obviously has to support it. And, people will often say to me, oh, I can't, just all I can do is draw a stick figure. And I get that. Like, not everyone has, artistic talents or ability or experience or whatever, but it's really the writing that is key. And the drawing really is just in support of that idea.
And how do you go about generating ideas and curating them, and a lot of times working through a lot of bad ideas to find ones that really kind of stick out of the soil?
Mm-hmm. Well, I just to take a step back in terms of the process, it's topic selection is a really huge piece of it, because I think what's worked for me to come up with good ideas is to have some passion about an issue. It's really hard for me to come up with a good idea on an issue that I just don't have the bile for. Yeah. And so there's that. And also you want to find something that's a mixture of something that I'm passionate about and also something that's on other people's radar, right? So those things. So the topic selection is really important. And then once you get to that stage, you're just starting to turn the concept around in your head. And first of all, like, what is it that I want to say? It is a political cartoon, so there's a point. And an important part of the process is distilling down to as succinct a sentence as I possibly can. What am I trying to say with this cartoon? If I skip that step, my cartoon's going to be fuzzy and amorphous, and it's not. And like, people are going to be like, what's going on here? Yeah. And so making a point. Then once you have that point, then you want to find some sort of humorous twist. And so there are all these comic devices. Hyperbole is a classic cartoonist device. Irony is a great one. Metaphor is a good one. Incongruous juxtaposition, putting together things that don't necessarily fit together. So it's a political cartoon, I believe, is visually making a political point and giving it that humorous twist in some way. And so it's a matter of just wrestling with the idea that I'm trying to put across, and what's an angle? What's an angle that I can put on this that people might be able to relate to? And a lot of times it's, say, a well understood cultural phenomena, like, let's say, The Wizard of Oz. People can relate to, like, The Man Behind the Curtain or The Cowardly Lion, something that's a well-known cultural icon, and then put a twist on it or something like that, So, I've appropriated lots of things like that, like a Bugs Bunny or a Charlie Brown or, all those types of things.
Yeah. There specifically, one that's sticking out to me is, the Tin Man with the, not having a heart. Yeah. And I think it might have to do with, like, Death with Dignity or something. You might know it off the top of your head. Yes, I do. Yeah. Yeah. Like, do I have that wrong? I know there was. It
was about a tax measure that was supposed to pay for some schools and services type of thing.
That's right.
And it was voted down. Yeah. So the cartoon is the Tin Man saying, if I only had a heart, I would have voted for that measure.
What were some of the ideas that over the course of the 26 years that you've been drawing these cartoons that it was just an idea and a topic that it was a gift that kept on giving?
it didn't last for too long, and unfortunately it ended tragically, but the Bundy takeover of the Malheur Wildlife Refuge was one where, this is really a big deal. Not only is it an issue like this land use issue that kind of strikes to the core of what it's like to live in the West, but it's also one that's captured the attention of people around the country. And those are always ones that I really feel have a special weight to them when people around like articles are in the New York Times about it and stuff like that. So I really feel like, those are the issues that I really, I'm deep into, and I feel very committed to doing a great cartoon on. Yeah.
Yeah. And, what are some of the particular idea where maybe your antenna are, especially in tune to, that frequency just lands on you a bit more frequently and provides that passion that you were talking about that you need to go then and generate the
What
the
are
work.
The issues that seem to resonate?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting question. Like I say, ones in which they attract national attention. Those are ones, just in the last 2 years, we had COVID, which was, it's just something that affected everybody. And it was it was just, my daughter observed, we're living through history right now, and so it's like, it's something that no one has a script for or whatever. So it's just kind of, it's new, everything's new. And then of course that same summer we had George Floyd and the whole racial reckoning that the country was going through. Those were just huge issues that I felt, that I really wanted to address in a thoughtful way, and really important issues. Unfortunately, sometimes what happens to me with covering Oregon stuff is that, like, the Oregon legislature, and I've made jokes about this, like one cartoon I did was about the Oregon legislature officially made Jory dirt the official soil of Oregon, and so sometimes you get kind of lost in some of the weeds of these little kind of inconsequential things, and you can make fun of it. But when you have something that really affects me personally and sort of universally is affecting people around me, those are the issues that I really can sink my teeth into. Yeah.
Yeah, and over the course of your tenure of writing or in drawing these cartoons, what have you noticed that has changed in the last quarter century, and what in your reckoning is also things that have also just really stayed the same?
Well, the second half of your question really resonates with me, because I have done so many cartoons about the kicker, for example.
Yeah.
So many cartoons about PERS. Some of these things just keep coming up in the same ways for 25 years. And I sometimes, when that's the news of the day, I wonder to myself, can I do another cartoon about PERS?
Yeah. I'm almost picturing just like you drawing yourself into a cartoon, like drawing the thing that you drew 25 years ago, and like that's the cartoon of just like the mirror reflecting on itself, and it's just this portal of constant repetition.
Reductio ad absurdum. Yeah. It's a little bit like that, and sometimes it is hard not to think self-referentially when coming up with a cartoon. Like, do I have to do this again? Maybe that's my cartoon. Exactly. Guy at the drawing board.
Yeah. So when you're coming up with an idea and hoping that one gloms onto you, so you have that energy and passion behind it, how do you go about, do you have a notebook where you're just taking down ideas and you're just, you come up with maybe 5 a day, and the hope is that out of the 30 you might come up with in a week, that one really stands out? Like,
oh boy, I wish it were that wonderfully thought out. No, I do read the paper every morning and make some mental notes. But basically my deadline is Thursday at 3:00, and I wake up Thursday morning and say, this is the day. And, and so partly because of the timeliness of things, that's part of it too. So something might happen earlier in the week that I could be like, oh, well, maybe that's a good cartoon. And then something happens, later in the week that supersedes it, and then I've sort of wasted my mental energy, I suppose, on the first thing.
Yeah.
And so, and all those news stories from previous stories from the week, they're all still there. So I can go online and check up on them. You're like, oh yeah, there's that thing from Tuesday. That's right. And so the timeliness does play a factor, but it's basically wake up in the morning and tabula rasa, get a cartoon done by 3:00.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your career as a cartoonist, what can you identify, early on that was a victory that put some fuel in your tank that allowed you to say, like, oh, I'm on the right path here?
Well, I think the ability to do what I just said regularly without pretty much almost ever emailing you or some other editor and saying I'm going to be late. Pretty much like doing that, being able to do that week after week, even when I'm at 12 o'clock and I don't have a good idea, I'm like, I know I can do this. I've done it before. I can figure it out. So yeah, it is that water under the bridge, the history with it. And, even here recently, I've had a couple of weeks where the topical issues of the day haven't really struck me that much. And so I have taken things that are a little less topical, maybe a little more typical, and made cartoons out of them and that work. And so that's another sort of safety valve, which is that I can always kind of come up with something that's more in the background rather than something that's right on the fresh off the headlines of that particular day. Yeah.
And did you have a particular mentor, as you were cutting your teeth too, that was that really, helped you along as you were finding your voice and your style?
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. A guy named Don Cayley, as a matter of fact, who writes a column for the Register Guard. Yeah. So I don't know exactly the timing of when he appeared and when I started, but it was right around the time that I was starting. I guess, yeah. So he was running the Comic News paper that he was doing, and I wanted to run my cartoons there, and then he kind of took it on himself to sort of be a bit of a mentor to me. And so I started showing him my rough ideas, and he would give me comments and so forth. And I continue to meet with him, not as regularly, and I don't submit my cartoon ideas to him now, but I really owe a debt of gratitude to Don for that.
And as you were putting together this book, what struck you as you were going back through the archives and curating the cartoons? And what did that tell you as you were putting this together?
Well, I have already talked about the fact that history, what did they say? It doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes.
Yeah.
So there is all that. It's interesting. So, I mean, I guess another way to phrase that question is, what have we learned about Oregon over the course of 26 years? And I would say that, it's a very interesting state. It's as I say, sort of on the back cover, we're liberal and conservative, we're urban and rural, we're weird and we're traditional. So it's a very interesting state with a lot of push and pull, and people aren't afraid to voice their opinion, and I think that's great too. So yeah, it's sort of this Wild West meets liberalness. I don't know. It's what have we grown up in the last 26 years? I'm not really sure.
Yeah, it's crazy. I've only been here 5 years. Just last week was kind of the 5-year anniversary of moving here from the East Coast, and it was great going back through and reading and seeing all these cartoons and hearing it echo even to this day. I'm like, oh, I'm familiar with that already. Like, it's funny that happened, or sad that it happened 25 years ago or 20 years ago, and these things seem to keep coming back.
Yeah,
and it was pretty wild to see, like, oh, I know exactly what we're talking about. Whether it be the Timber Wars or Kicker or Purrs, all these things that I hear about as part of my day job, and it's just wild to hear that thing just always coming back to the forefront. You're like, has forward progress been made? I don't know. Yeah,
we'll see. It's hard to really say. The Timber Wars thing is an interesting one, and there's recently that kind of an agreement that's been reached between environmental groups and some timber industry, and I don't know exactly where that's going, but that's an interesting piece. It would be nice if there was some way that there could be some agreement on some sustainable way. We need wood products, but we also need to not cut down all the trees, and so it's like maybe they're finding a common ground. I that's probably a bit naive to think that it's actually going to bring peace to the timber wars, but I'm hopeful.
Yeah, and I was talking with some fire experts a few months ago. I was just trying to think about doing like a big piece on wildfire, and and it's where it's on the one side, timber wants to log to prevent fires to death. And then on the other side, the fire experts and the environmentalists are like, no, they're just such on opposite sides. And there's I don't know how they can bridge it and have a conversation that's productive, because they have such disparate ideas of what it means to prevent wildfire and to preserve the landscape. Each end seems very self-serving with no real common ground. I have no answers or what that conversation how it should evolve, but it's so complicated, and they just seem so dug in too.
Right. Very dug in, and they've kind of learned the lesson that if you give an inch, it'll take a mile. So it's sort of and it's reflective of polarization we see in so many areas in this country today of, it's my way or the highway. And that is difficult. And I guess I'll definitely cop to leaning liberal on my political views, but I do try to hold in my mind all political viewpoints when I'm drawing a cartoon, so that I'm not sort of mindlessly bludgeoning somebody with my political idea. It's that humorous twist, I believe, that is kind of the key. At least I believe it's the key to just helping people put down their armor just a little bit. And maybe have an idea sort of creep through, and I think being able to laugh at yourself actually is really, really important. And if you can do that, then you can at least sort of appreciate, if not agree with, a political viewpoint that might not be your own.
Just from you as an artist and a writer, over the course of the span of this book, when you were putting it together, what did you notice about your own development as a writer and an artist over the course of putting this book together and then seeing this body of work for a quarter century?
Yeah. Well, the artwork, I definitely noticed a difference. If you kind of go to page one, it's pretty rough. There's obviously some talent or whatever there, but I definitely gained a lot of skills over the years just having drawn a cartoon every week. I mean, I think there's only 240 plus cartoons in this book. In total, I think I've drawn something like 800 or 900 cartoons in that span. And so that's just a lot of time at the drawing table and practice and stuff like that. So I feel good about that. And then in terms of the writing, I think I have matured and understood what I just said, is that it's not helpful to just kind of beat people over the head with your viewpoint without any kind of humor or any kind of dexterity going towards it, because you're really just preaching to the choir at that point. You're not making any attempt to reach across and not necessarily find common ground, but try to help people look at things a little differently.
Yeah, and it's to your point of how you see the drawings and the line work evolve over time. It's so cool to see. I've got a Calvin and Hobbes collection there, the entire Calvin and Hobbes, the entire Far Side.
Oh yeah.
If you go back to their early cartoons, as skilled as Watterson and Larson are, it's crude and rough early on, and then over the course of a decade plus of drawing cartoons, those are only the published ones we see. Who knows how many they're drawing and are scrapped as practice.
Yeah.
And you just see the evolution of the artist, of how clean things are getting. And it just goes to show you that whatever discipline we might be, whether it be a writer or a cartoonist, so much of this just takes repetition and comfort and sitting with it and doing the work over time. And you can see the evidence of it. You can see the proof of how you've gotten better as an artist over the course of this time. It's just staying with it.
Right. No, absolutely. And I'm glad you also mentioned Watterson. He's definitely artistically a huge influence on me. Yeah.
Maybe you can speak to this, that just over the course of your career, how so often it's us being able to sit with bad writing, bad cartoons to get to those good ones. Over the course of your career, how have you developed a tolerance and a muscle for doing bad work that's not a waste? It might go in the waste paper basket, but ultimately it's building a skill, and good stuff has no choice but to come out of the bad eventually.
Right. I think that one of the things that I have developed is a discernment of what is kind of meet some minimum criteria of like, this is going to be okay. Like I sort of say, I at least want to hit a clean single every time. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I hit a home run. I know I'm not going to hit a home run every time. But I really feel strongly that it's got to be something good. It can't be crummy. And so, yeah, I mean, I will sit there and wrestle with it for a while. You know, I'll have an idea that's like, oh, this seems like it should work. But here I have this reservation about it or whatever. It's not fully formed. And so, yeah, building up that ability to, and really to judge your own work, I think is another piece that is, you know, that's a skill too, because I think in the early days, one is maybe a little more self-conscious and not quite as self-confident. And so it's harder to be introspective and be self-critical in the early days, whereas later on it's easier to do without worrying that, you know, oh no, I'm bad.
Mm-hmm. Where is the fear for you when you're constructing or coming up with an idea, and how do you learn to sort of confront that fear that you might get some backlash, but this is still something really important to your point of view?
Mm-hmm. I would actually say one of my biggest fears is that I draw a cartoon and somebody interprets it the wrong way. And so I feel very strongly that that's on me if that happens. And so one thing that I try to do is look at my cartoon kind of with a fresh eye. Sort of once I have the rough drawing there ready to go, I'm about to ink it in and really sort of go forward with the artistic production of it. Just look at it and be like, how could somebody interpret this in a way that I don't mean? And that's maybe still a skill that is emerging. I mean, all of my skills are emerging, but that one maybe more so than others, because it's hard to just look at something with fresh eyes when you've been sort of hammering it around in your brain for the last hour or two. And that's one that I just really, that's one of my bigger fears is to have someone misinterpret and again, not because of some problem with how they're thinking, but of how I've drawn it. And I don't want to give anyone any like weird escape routes. I want my idea to be very sharply in focus, and that's the only conclusion you can come to.
Yeah. I remember a few weeks ago, probably a couple months ago at this point, where Bill Bramhall, the great cartoonist for the Daily News, he had drawn. I saw the original and I saw the new one. And I couldn't really discern, but apparently, he had drawn Andrew Yang in a somewhat insensitive way, mm-hmm. and it's one of those things where if you slip up a little bit, the sensitivity of the drawing can be counterintuitive. It'll lose that focus of the idea because the drawing might be pulling on insensitive tropes. It's like, oh, okay, if I'm drawing a particular group of people, I have to be real careful not to falsely caricature them.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And last summer when I was doing some cartoons about this racial reckoning that I talked about, I tried to focus more on white people because that's an experience that I know about, and I know that that racism in this country it's a white person's problem, that white people need to deal with it. Let me put it that way. And so I felt on pretty good ground of portraying white people grappling with their racism. And so because I don't know anything about the Black experience or the Latinx experience, so I don't really want to try to go there and try to portray that experience. That's not my place. That's not my space. And so anyway, try to stay in my lane. Let's put it that way.
Right. And something you and I spoke about a couple months ago is this idea of political cartoons as journalism and whether they are journalism or not. And I remember just in my day job as editing the opinion page for the Register Guard, I would get some people, just based on the cartoon I would select, they would say, oh, this is misleading and this is untrue. Mm-hmm. And I would write back, I'm like, listen, they're they're using hyperbole, they're poking fun at something. If you're getting your information from a political cartoon, I was like, you need to find a better place to get your information. This is meant to poke fun, jab, and be sometimes elliptical with the truth. And that got me thinking to reach out to you and to get your impressions about the responsibility, how much elasticity in that truth can you play with. And I just on the mics here, I want to extend it back to you. Just be like, what's your relationship to political cartoons as actual journalism?
Yeah, well, I do believe that I want my cartoons to be based in fact. So if I'm making political point X, I want to be sure that it's based on facts that I understand to be true. And so that's one piece. I also believe that I agree with you that people shouldn't be getting their news from political cartoons, but especially as it comes to, say, Oregon issues, not everyone's up on what's going on specifically with the state of Oregon for whatever reason. And I believe that some of my cartoons are almost more expositional in nature than anything else. It's like, this is something that's happening, and I want people to know about it. And so I'm going to draw a cartoon about it, but I'm going to try to put as much information as I can. There's a limited amount I can do, but I also want to open the door a little bit for a person to do a little bit more reading if they don't really know about it. So those are two sides of it, I guess. But I agree with you that hyperbole is definitely in play, and people should understand in terms of their media literacy that political cartoons are going to stretch reality a little bit, maybe not necessarily the truth or facts, or they shouldn't expect them to lie to them, but they should expect a somewhat distorted. It's just everything's in really high contrast, like a higher contrast than it normally is. Of course, everything has nuanced shades of gray. That's how life is. And what a cartoon does is it renders it just in black and white. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's not going to be correct.
Yeah. Yeah, it goes to the point of how the Daily Show or Weekend Update on SNL, it's the fun that they're poking at the news and at the expense of certain characters. There is a kernel of truth, and the joke really drives home that the real meaning. It's shrouded and sheathed and veiled in comedy, but the kernel at the heart of it is like stone cold true.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
No, that's absolutely true. I think that's right, and that is where I want the kernel to come from. I do want the kernel to be factual, so that's important to me. Yeah, there is something about that a visual medium like cartoons that I think are more visceral, perhaps, than reading words. So that's another piece of it too that a cartoon has that maybe words don't have. I think it just hits people in a different part of their body a little bit. I mean, there's obviously words in the cartoon, but the visual aspect of it does that, I think.
Yeah, and I think what your book does a really good job of too is like you take you make the effort to provide context to each cartoon. So that little news graph, which might be effectively like the lead to a newspaper story, just here's the context and this is what it means. Like, how important was it for you to provide that context? That way the cartoon, makes sense, whether it be yesterday or 25 years ago.
Yeah, I think it's pretty essential. Otherwise, this book would be really out of reach for most people. Yeah. So it is important, I think, for people to know that I do have a little sort of fake newspaper article, very short headline and a little subhead with each cartoon to help put people in the mind of the context of where that cartoon came from. I mean, there's cartoons from 1995 in here, for God's sakes. I mean, I don't, you say you came here just 5 years ago. It's like, of course you weren't around, but by being able to get that context, I think it makes it accessible to everybody. It's not just for political junkies or historians or whatever like that. Yeah.
Yeah. What's the greatest amount of grief that you get from readers and consumers of your work over the years?
That's a really good question. The most grief that I've gotten are from liberals when I poke fun, because I believe that liberals are not immune to the same foibles and turning their brains off to new information. Everyone does this. Okay, it doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, and when I kind of poke my barb in that direction, I do get. I get some angry emails, sent to me, because they're kind of like with this tone of like, or subtext of, I thought you were on our side, you know? So, you know, that there's been some betrayal or something like that. And, you know, I'm just trying to call them as I see them. And so that's an interesting one. But I have gotten also certainly other complaints from all sides of the political spectrum.
Yeah. I've gotten angry emails from people if I publish conservative or right-leaning letters, like the very few that we even get, and some people are like, don't you know your audience? Like, why are you publishing this? I'm like, do you really want an echo chamber here? Like, I'm so thankful, whether I agree or not, of some of the letters I get from the right. Like I said, it's probably 9-1 liberal to conservative that come in, and I'm like, I'm so thankful for the coherent ones that come in that I can actually polish and get into the paper, because we need those extra point of view. Otherwise, I mean, I'm just sometimes so tired of hearing about the same things that the left wants to, the drum that they're beating all over and over again. So to get something from the right is it's very refreshing, whether you agree with it or not, and to then play those off each other, it just creates a much more, you know, balanced product for people to at least, you know, stop being so complacent in their own thoughts.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And this is the argument that I try to make when I reach out to editors in the eastern part of the state and try to convince them to run my sort of left of center cartoons, and try to convince them that a vibrant discussion on the editorial page is good for the community and for the paper. Sometimes I win that argument, sometimes I don't.
Yeah. And in what ways have you been able to, you know, challenge people's, you know, misconceptions, or just challenge their worldviews, you know, with your work? You know, what's that dialogue like when you're trying to, you know, lobby them to be like, hey, listen, this is another side of the issue, to create that vibrancy that we so desperately need?
Yeah, well, definitely the cartoon itself is definitely not a dialogue. It's kind of a shot across the bow, really. But in this some of the emails that I get with people that disagree with me, I would say at least half of the time we end up saying, hey, I'm really glad we had this little email back and forth. You know, you sound like a reasonable person. We disagree on some things, but, you know, I can kind of see where you're coming from or whatever. And so that's really where the dialogue takes place, is when you can actually have a nuanced conversation. Like I say, the political cartoons are just really black and white, and so the dialogue kind of happens after that.
In this day, a digital age, when we're so often not face-to-face, or we're just avatars on social media or something, people get really, really heated and fired up. And then, you know, once the blood stops boiling and you're able to maybe pop off a more measured response, people... their hackles go down, and they realize that there is actually another human being on the other side of that. Ultimately, I think whether it's, you know, a message you're trying to convey in a cartoon or a column, it's just, or someone writing in a very heated thing, they just want to be seen and they just want to be heard, right?
Yes, I think that's right. No, and I absolutely agree with you. It's sort of this face-to-face conversation that's really where we're going to, you know, kind of bridge these gaps, and that's a really actually a very important thing to me, and it's something that I'm interested in trying to pursue in this community. I don't think political cartoons is the way to do it, but I'm trying to figure out some way that I can follow up on that idea, because, you know, not being able to sort of living on different planets is not working for us.
Right. Yeah. Well, and as you're, you know, when Thursday comes around and you're like, all right, deadline's cracking, I got to get this work done. Like, what is the step-by-step process in pulling in even the tools you use, whether you start with, you know, pencil and then ink and then scan it and then color in Photoshop, I imagine. Sure. You know, what's that process like for you, just from A to Z? Yeah.
Well, so it starts with sitting down at the computer. Well, after I've had my breakfast over the morning paper, of course, sitting down at the computer, put Oregon into the Google search, hit the news tab and see what comes up. Of course, 50 to 60% is about sports. And so I just have to kind of scroll past all those to get to the sort of actual news items. But yeah, I basically make a note of all the news items that have happened in that week that, you know, feel like they're have larger radar cross sections, and that people are paying attention to. And then so I have maybe a list of anywhere from 3 to 8 usually topics that I have written down, and then I sit down and sort of scan that and make an evaluation about which is the one that is really that I'm going to zero in on. And I'll cross some ideas off because, well, that really isn't, people don't really know about that, or this isn't really getting me upset about something or excited about something, or this has legs. This will come up later, so I can save it for another week. That's another reason why I might pass up a topic. But then once I pick a topic, like I was mentioning before, I'll just start to knock it around. Like, what's the angle that I want to take on it? Like, here's the thing here's my succinct political statement that I want to make about it. What is the angle that I want to take? What's funny about, what could be funny about this? Oftentimes, I like, how would a child view this? Like, I often use that approach. Like, like the grown-ups in the room are arguing and they're bickering. Like, what would a child say? Like, to this, that's just one potential approach. But I've developed, and when I say I've developed, I've observed and studied other people, but I have collected, the sort of comic device toolkit, and it's almost like I don't sort of go down the list of, well, will hyperbole work? Will metaphor work? It just sort of, at this point, it just sort of starts to seep in, and sometimes no idea comes. I go for a walk around the block and sit back down again, and maybe something will come back in. So there is definitely writer's block that comes into play, but eventually I'll look at my watch enough times. I'm like, okay, time's a waste in here. Yeah. So then once I have the germ of an idea, I will do some pretty small thumbnail sketches, and then just to kind of work out some of the composition pieces, and then I'll do a rough drawing either within the box of my cartoon constraint, or I will just draw the component pieces and then scan them in and assemble them, sort of size and place them in a box once in them in Photoshop. And that gives me a little more compositional flexibility than the first sort of drawing it just completely in the box. I know that was a little wonky there, but
I can see it. I can see it.
So I have a compositional sketch assembled, and then I print that out, put it on my light box, and put a piece of smooth tracing-ish kind of paper over it, and then I use a few different brush pens. There's some great brush pens now. Have sort of one that goes for thick lines, and one that's for medium lines, one that's for thinner lines, and then I have like a pen, just a regular black and white pen, and essentially trace what I've done. I try to keep it loose and not have it just be like a real tight tracing, but at the same time, my composition sketch has some details and stuff that I want to make sure that I get in there. And so then I scan that inked piece into my computer, and then from there I apply color in Photoshop. And for that, I usually use, not for every little bit of it, but I use a pressure sensitive tablet to get little sort of strokes in there. And that's pretty much it. And then we have a color cartoon, which can go on websites in color, and then I create a grayscale version, probably tweak it a little bit just to get the values of the grays right, and then that is ready for black and white.
Nice. And where do you feel the most alive and engaged in the process of composing a cartoon?
Well, you feel alive when you're nervous that you can't meet a deadline and it's getting late. So that's a time when you feel alive. But yeah, definitely once an idea has popped into my head, there's definitely a juice of energy that's like, okay, this is something I can use. This is something that's going to turn into something. Sometimes I don't necessarily have it fully fleshed out, but I'm like, yeah, this is it. This is what is going to get across my idea with that humorous twist that I'm looking for. And I know that I'm on the road. I just need to execute it at this point. So yeah, there's kind of a little spring in my step at that moment.
What an email or a phone call or anything from a reader or consumer of your cartoon, like what is the most outlandish thing that someone has said? Like, oh, Jesse, like, you should do this. And you're like,
Oh, yeah. So I do get that. I do get, like, you should draw this cartoon. And it's like, yeah, they're usually not very outlandish at all. It's like, you should have Trump on an iceberg saying to a polar bear, I don't know. It's just sort of like,
Yeah.
they're usually... Okay, let's just be generous. They're just usually they're very straightforward. They don't really have much of a twist to it, and they're just basically illustrating their idea, which I get. And what I always say to people, whether whoever they are, no matter what side of the political spectrum, I always encourage them to draw their own cartoons. People are not as bad at drawing as they think, and I also talk about the fact that the writing is the key part and the drawing is just in support of it. So I really do encourage people to draw their own cartoons.
Yeah, well, it's someone who likes to draw. It's definitely it's one of those things where, yeah, the first ones you do are always kind of garbage, but you really have to just stick with it for a long time. Then you get better over time. But so many people just get real discouraged early on.
Yes.
Right?
I've seen a lot of artistic discouragement especially when they're talking to me and they know that I draw and stuff. So people have bad art self-esteem. I think that's something that we need to work on in this country.
Oh my God, that's so great. Yeah, bad art self-esteem. I love hearing that. I haven't heard that like articulated so perfectly, but it's so true.
Yeah. We need to really work on that.
And where do you so you've got this volume of 26 years of cartoons, and you're still going. And where would you say your optimism lies?
About the cartooning, or about the political state of the world, or
I guess in the ongoing story of Oregon. And I guess even the state of the world. But you're chronicling this stuff, and it's a pictorial history in hyperbole, and here you are, it's still chronicling this, week after week after week, and you see trends, you see things change, you see things not change, so maybe as you're documenting this, and quite literally a historian in a sense, what still lights you up, and where's your optimism lie, as someone who I can tell there's optimism in you.
Yeah, no, there's optimism, and I talked about trying to bridge this gap somehow, and I don't think political cartoons is the way to do it, honestly, but I think political cartoons do serve a purpose. Yeah, I don't know. We are in a kind of a dark time right now in terms of the divisiveness, and in this state in particular, the people that tend to agree with me politically are in political power. So that is, I guess, comforting to me. But I don't feel good about the people that feel completely disenfranchised. I felt that way for 4 years when Trump was president, and I know what that feels like, and it's not good. And so what can we do to sort of bring people in and have them invested in what's going on and feeling like we're going in a good direction. So I feel like it's possible. Again, I'm not really sure what the path is, and that'll be something that I'll be working on. But I do feel like we are kind of maybe the darkest before the dawn right now. I don't know. Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, as someone who has been chronicling the Oregon story pictorially for a quarter century, and right now in the Oregon legislature, you're dealing with super majorities, Democrats, and that's not always been the case. Sometimes it's been quite the other way. Yes. So for you, what's the most fun dynamic for you to draw from, for your cartoons, like just given the whatever situation is concurrently going on in the legislature? Is it a balance? Is it more fun to draw from when it's right or left?
Yeah. Well, when there was a shift when I first started drawing in 1995. I can't remember. I think Barbara Roberts was still governor, but the legislature was definitely more in Republican control at that point, and then that started to shift through the sort of turn of the millennium, I guess you'd say. There was a moment then, and there continues to be moments when the Democrats have a little bit of difficulty dealing with the fact that they're in power, and some of the ethics concerns are now pointed squarely at them, and sort of when you're in power, what do they say? Absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? And so there's problems with Democrats, even though, I may agree with a lot of their policies. They kind of go about things in some crummy ways sometimes. And so I definitely don't have a problem pointing my pointed, sharpened pencil at them. For sure, because people in power that are not using their power wisely and compassionately deserve to be criticized.
Fantastic. Well, Jesse, this book it's so fun to go through, and it's just such a testament to your to your critical eye in the whimsical way in which you tell these stories. So where can people, get familiar with you and your work if they're not already familiar with it, and find the book in this holiday season?
Yeah. So actually, I don't know. I'm not. I'm a graphic designer and a cartoonist. I'm not a book marketer. But what I've decided at this point that it's only going to be available on my website at this point, and so the URL for that is springerdesign.biz biz/books. Plural. And so that's where you need to go to buy the book. And on that page, you can see sample pages of the book. And you can also, I made a video slideshow. I don't know if you had a chance to see that. I don't know if I sent you the link to that, but I do a sort of a 20-minute highlight slideshow, as I might give if live in-person events were happening, like at the library, for example.
Oh, nice.
And sort of go through a sampling of the cartoons, explain a little bit about them, and show them. And so anyway, so that's actually a really fun entree if you want to sort of see what the book is about. I highly recommend going to springerdesign.biz/books. Check out that video, and also another short video that explains the little articles that go with it, the instant context that help people understand it. So
awesome. Well, this is great. Well, thanks so much for coming by the studio here and talking shop and giving us some insight into the great chronicling of the Oregon story in the last 26 years. So thanks, Jesse. Thanks for the work, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks very much, Brendan. I really appreciate you having me.
Thanks to Jesse, and thank you for the time. Thanks to West Virginia Wesleyan College's MFA in Creative Writing for the support as well. springerdesign.biz/books. That's where you're going to want to go buy the book. He's actually got some really cool videos there as well about the book, the Oregon story, how to draw a political cartoon, good stuff. You can follow Jesse on Twitter @SpringerTunes. You can keep the conversation going @CNFPod and @Creative Nonfiction Podcast. Consider heading over to Patreon for the support to help subsidize this enterprise. Patreon.com/CNFPod. A lot of goodies over there. You can ask questions of future guests. I give you credit for that. Head over to BrendanO'Mara.com for the show notes, for the newsletter, and lots of cool goodies that I hope will put fuel in your tank. But, like I said, COVID thing is kicking the crap out of me, so I'm going to get up on out of here. I wish I had more to give, but I don't. So, stay wild, CNFers, and if you can do, interview. See ya.